You thought your grandfather's funeral would be the one place to find peace after weeks of exhaustion and grief. But in that sacred moment, as the inheritance was revealed, your father, who had rarely cared for you, stood tall, claimed the entire $56 million fortune, and turned to you with eyes colder than stone. "You're useless to me now." Those words cut deeper than the silence of death. In one breath, you lost not only your grandfather, but the last thread of dignity you thought your family held. What you didn't know was that his will carried a hidden truth, one that would flip your world upside down within just 24 hours. If this betrayal happened to you, how would your revenge story begin? You still remember the earliest image of your mother, her soft auburn hair glowing in the sunlight as she brushed your hair before bed. She was warmth, safety, and the very definition of home. But when you were only 8, illness stole her away, leaving behind a silence no child should ever endure. And when your father told you, his voice was dry, clinical, devoid of grief. He simply announced that mom isn't coming back, close quote, then returned to work as if nothing had changed. That night, you cried until your grandfather, William, carried you into his arms. He smelled faintly of sawdust and old books, a comforting scent that told you he would never abandon you. He moved you into his creaking New England home, a place of wide staircases, shelves heavy with books, and a canopy bed he said once belonged to your mother. "She loved this room when she was your age," close quote, he whispered, and in that moment, you knew you were safe again. Grandpa William wasn't just wealthy. He was a self-made man who had built an empire in construction with nothing but his bare hands and determination. He taught you that money meant nothing if you couldn't respect people. He drove the same old Buick for 15 years and made Belgian waffles every Sunday, turning the kitchen into a place of laughter and lessons. "Wealth," close quote, he would say, "isn't what you flaunt, it's what you build inside." Your father, Thomas, was nothing like that. Though he worked at William's company, he carried entitlement rather than vision. He looked at the antiques in William's house with calculating eyes, mentally listing their value. And whenever you sought his attention at a school play, during a celebration, even at your graduation, he was either absent or distracted. You'd scan the crowd, praying to see his face, only to find the seat empty or his eyes glued to your phone. Grandpa never missed a single moment. He sat proudly in the front row, camera ready, his pride for you written across every wrinkle on his face. He was your rock, the one who made you believe you mattered, even when your own father's approval never came. When you finally entered college, you thought choosing business administration, the very path your father had taken, might bring you closer to him. "See, Dad, I'm following in your footsteps," close quote, you told him, waiting for his smile. His response: "A bland business is sensible. It will give you security." No joy, no pride. Just practicality. That night, William took you out for dinner and celebrated as though you'd won the lottery. He gave you a leather-bound journal, its first page marked with his handwriting. To see the true measure of a person, watch how they treat others when they think no one is looking. Years passed, and the contrast between William and Thomas grew starker. Your father came to William's house only for business. He'd nod at you politely, ask empty questions about your studies, then shift his gaze back to valuable paintings or antique furniture. Meanwhile, your grandfather made every Sunday sacred. Together, you baked waffles, read books, and debated politics and philosophy. "A mind," close quote, he would say, "is like a muscle, it grows only if you exercise it." Those moments carved you into who you became, someone who valued people, not power. But time, unrelenting as it is, began to wear down William's health. His once strong frame grew frail, and doctors delivered the blow. Congestive heart failure. 6 months, maybe less. You dropped everything, your job, your independence, to move back into his home, transforming into his caregiver. Days blurred into nights of medications, oxygen checks, and whispered conversations about life. "Life is just a collection of stories," close quote, William told you one evening. "Make sure yours is worth telling." And during those months, something else happened. Your father began visiting more often. At first, you thought he was finally learning to care. He brought wine, sat with William, and pretended to reminisce. But you noticed his questions always circled back to the company, the estate, the will. He looked at his father less as a man nearing his end, and more as a key unlocking fortune. One evening, after Thomas left, William took your hand and said, "People show you who they are. It's not your job to make excuses for them." You wanted to believe Thomas had changed, but deep down, you recognized the same hunger in his eyes. The truth became undeniable. The closer William came to his end, the closer Thomas came to his supposed beginning. And then, one quiet morning, as the sun rose outside the bedroom window, William's breathing slowed. You held his hand, whispering softly, trying to keep him tethered to the world, but at 3:17 a.m., he slipped away. The silence was deafening. You called your father, voice trembling with grief. He answered groggy, but as soon as you spoke the words, "He's gone," close quote, his tone sharpened. "Don't call anyone else yet. I'll be right there." An hour later, he appeared, not in morning clothes but in a tailored suit, crisp and sharp, as though he had a board meeting. Before even acknowledging your tears, he headed straight for the study, rifling through drawers. "What are you doing?" You asked, disbelief tightening your voice. "Looking for the will," he replied, matter of fact. Grief froze in your chest, replaced by something colder. The realization that your father wasn't mourning, he was calculating. The funeral followed days later, under a grey sky that mirrored your heart. The church overflowed with mourners. Employees William had mentored, clients who had become friends, neighbors who admired his humility. "You wore the simple black dress William once said made you look elegant." Your father gave his eulogy first. His words were polished, professional, full of phrases like market leadership and financial stewardship. He spoke of the company, not the man. Not once did he mention waffles, roses, or the quiet strength William had shown. His words were cold, corporate, hollow. Then came your turn. Legs trembling, you stood before the packed church and spoke from your heart. "My grandfather measured wealth not in dollars, but in moments. He taught me that legacy is love, not numbers on a page." You share stories of waffles, quiet lessons, and the strength William carried until his last breath. Tears shimmered in strangers' eyes as you sat down, your voice still echoing in the silence. But as the service ended, you saw your father again, not grieving, not even pretending. He whispered to his assistant, who scribbled furiously, recording names of attendees, noting business connections, turning loss into leverage. The next day, you sat in William's study for the formal reading of the will. The oak desk that had once been his sanctuary now carried the weight of final words. Harold Jenkins, the family lawyer, opened the folder. Your father sat behind the desk already, as if staking his claim. The provisions began with funeral expenses, small bequests to loyal staff. Then Harold's voice shifted to the inheritance clause. "To my son, Thomas William Stewart, I leave Stewart Construction Company and all its holdings, valued at approximately $56 million, along with the family residence and its contents." The words hit you like ice water. Thomas's face transformed, impatience replaced by triumph. He sat taller, chest puffed, a king crowned at last. Executives murmured congratulations, though their eyes flickered toward you with pity. You sat still, waiting for your name. It never came. "Is that everything?" You asked Harold, forcing your voice to remain steady. Before he could answer, Thomas smirked. "You heard it all. The company and estate are mine. You need to pack your things. This house is for the CEO, not for guests." Guests. That was what you were to him. A guest in the only home you had ever truly known. That night, you lay awake in your childhood room, staring at the ceiling. Every memory pressed down on you. The banister you had slid down as a child, the pencil marks tracking your growth, the reading nook where William had read aloud to you. All of it now belonged to someone else. Morning brought no comfort. Instead, 2 security guards appeared, hired by your father to oversee the transition. They stood stiffly in the foyer as you carried suitcases down the stairs. "You are really doing this?" You asked him, your voice breaking. "Standard precaution," he replied smoothly, not meeting your eyes. "Nothing personal." But it was personal. Every step felt like betrayal. You clutched the Afghan your grandmother had knitted, the seashells from Cape Cod, the music box William gave you at 16. Each item whispered, "You belonged here once." Outside, one of the guards who helped with your bags gave you a sympathetic nod. "I'm sorry, miss," he said quietly. And that was how you left the only true home you had ever known. You drove to a modest hotel, its beige walls and sterile furniture mocking you with their emptiness. You laid the Afghan on the bed, trying to carve out a corner of belonging, but grief came in waves. It wasn't just for William. It was for the father you never had, the home ripped from you, the dignity trampled beneath greed. Doubt consumed you. Maybe your father was right. Maybe you were useless now. But in the darkest silence, you remembered William's words. "Don't worry about your future. I've made sure you'll be taken care of." And though your heart was shattered, a flicker of hope stirred deep inside. Perhaps his promise still held meaning. Perhaps the story wasn't over yet. The following afternoon, while you were still in that sterile hotel room trying to figure out how to rebuild your life, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside told you to pick it up. "Miss Stewart?" A calm voice asked. "This is Patricia from Harold Jenkins' office. Mr. Jenkins would like to see you this afternoon. It concerns your grandfather's estate and is of urgent importance." Your heart skipped. For a moment you thought it might be a cruel mistake, but instinct told you otherwise. At 3 o'clock sharp, you entered Harold's office. The old wood-paneled walls, the shelves heavy with law books, the scent of leather, it felt more like stepping into history than into a lawyer's office. Harold rose, his expression gentler than it had been during the reading of the will. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, offering you a chair. I expect the last 24 hours have been unbearable. Tears blurred your vision. My father had security escort me out this morning, close quote, you whispered. Harold's eyes narrowed and he leaned back. Did Thomas even read the complete will? Close quote, you blinked in confusion. He told you to send a summary. He said he had caught the important parts. A dry chuckle left Harold's lips. Exactly as your grandfather predicted. He opened a leather-bound folder and began flipping through pages marked with yellow tabs. Yes, Thomas was named heir. But the inheritance came with conditions. Your grandfather anticipated his son's impatience. And his greed. Your pulse quickened as Harold adjusted his glasses and read aloud. The bequest to my son, Thomas William Stewart, is contingent upon his agreement to provide lifetime support for my granddaughter Jeline Sarah Stewart. This includes, but is not limited to, her continued residence at the family home, a monthly allowance of $10,000, and coverage of all educational and healthcare costs. Should Thomas fail to fulfill these obligations or cause Jeline undue hardship, the entirety of the estate, including Stewart Construction, shall transfer immediately to Jeline. You gripped the edge of your chair. He already broke that condition. He threw me out this morning. You gripped the edge of your chair, knuckles white as your breath caught in your throat. He already broke that condition. He threw me out this morning. The words tasted like iron, heavy with humiliation yet sharpened into resolve. Harold smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with a satisfaction born of foresight. Precisely, close quote, he said, tapping the document with deliberate calm. Less than 24 hours after the will reading, he violated the terms. Which means, my dear, you are now the legal owner of your grandfather's estate, the company, and all assets. The entire fortune is yours. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Shock collided with relief, and then with gratitude so overwhelming you could barely breathe. William had not abandoned you. He had crafted one last lesson, one final test, and when Thomas failed, the legacy fell into the hands of the one person who had proven worthy of it. You closed your eyes, letting silent tears spill, not of weakness but of vindication. Later that evening, you drove back to the house, headlights cutting through the dusk. The driveway was still occupied by Thomas's sleek black Mercedes, polished and smug as its owner, parked deliberately in the prime spot, as if to remind you who once ruled here. But this time, you were not alone. A security van rolled up behind you, and 3 officers stepped out with quiet authority, their footsteps echoing like judgment on the stone driveway. You handed them the legal papers Harold had prepared. I'm the owner now, close quote, you told them, and for the first time in days, your voice did not shake, it rang with conviction. When your father opened the door and saw you flanked by uniformed men, his expression snapped from arrogance to alarm. What's going on? Close quote, he demanded, his voice rising with the brittle edge of a man losing control. The lead officer answered smoothly, Sir, we've been authorized to update the locks and transfer security access to the new legal owner, Miss Stewart. Thomas's face darkened, color rising to his cheeks. That's absurd. I am the owner. You met his gaze without blinking. For a moment he simply stared, speechless, as if the ground beneath him had vanished. Then, with a burst of desperate energy, he stormed into the study, gesturing at the antique desk, as though the polished wood itself could testify on his behalf. This is some kind of trick. You and that old lawyer conspiring behind my back. Close quote, no trick, close quote, you said calmly, each word carrying weight. Grandfather knew exactly what you would do. He gave you the chance to prove him wrong, and you proved him right within a single day. A knock came at the study door. One of the officers stepped in, holding a new set of keys. Miss Stewart, the locks have been changed. Where should I deliver them? Close quote, you extended your hand slowly, savoring the moment. The cool weight against your palm sent a shiver through you. This wasn't just a house key, it was justice forged into metal, proof that betrayal had consequences, and a reminder that dignity could be reclaimed. For the first time in a long while, you exhaled freely, knowing the home once stolen was now irrevocably yours. Your father's shoulders sagged, defiance draining out like water from a cracked vessel. This is my house, close quote, he muttered, but the conviction had vanished. The words were thin, pitiful, a hollow echo of the man who only hours before strutted through these halls like a king. You shook your head slowly, steady and unflinching. Not anymore, close quote, you answered, each syllable crisp and sharp. You did this to yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to pause, as though the house itself knew where its loyalty now belonged. The next morning dawned cold and pale, light spilling across your childhood bedroom. You rose with a steadiness you had not felt in days, and drove back to Harold's office for one final meeting. The air inside was hushed, the kind of quiet that precedes revelations. Thomas was already there when you entered, sitting rigid beside his attorney. His suit was pressed, but his darting eyes betrayed turmoil, fixed nervously on the table where Harold had prepared a folder and a laptop. Without preamble, Harold dimmed the lights and pressed play on a video file. The screen flickered, then stabilized into the face you longed to see, your grandfather. Frail, yes, his skin parchment thin and his voice weaker than you remembered, but the eyes, those piercing eyes that once made seasoned businessmen stammer, still carried their fire. You felt the breath catch in your throat. If you were watching this, close quote, William said, steady despite his failing body, then you have done exactly what I feared, Thomas. You cast your daughter aside the moment you thought you had everything. Across the table, Thomas shifted, his face reddening as if the words scorched him. He tried to look away, but the screen held him captive. I gave you one last chance, close quote, William continued, tone sharpened with disappointment, a chance to prove family mattered more than fortune. Instead, you revealed who you truly are. The company, the estate, everything now belongs to Jolene. This is not punishment. It is consequence. The video ended abruptly, plunging the room into silence so thick you could hear Thomas's shallow breathing. For the first time, he looked smaller, diminished, as if the weight of his father's judgment had found its mark. Then Harold clicked the second recording. The shift was immediate. This time William's expression softened, his gaze warm, his voice imbued with the gentleness you knew so well. My dearest Jolene, close quote, he said, and your throat tightened until you could hardly swallow. If you are seeing this, it means everything happened as I expected. I am proud of you. You have shown me what true family means. This company, this legacy, it is yours. Lead with compassion, but never confuse it with weakness. You are stronger than you know. Tears blurred your vision, spilling down your cheeks. For the first time since his death, you felt his presence wrap around you like an embrace, steady and unyielding, as though he was beside you once more. The ache in your chest softened, replaced by something fiercer, resolve, courage, love carried forward. When the second video ended, Harold slid a final letter across the table, its envelope marked with William's unmistakable handwriting. He cleared his throat and read aloud. If Thomas demonstrates genuine change and contributes meaningfully to the company for at least 2 years, Jolene may, at her discretion, consider sharing a portion of ownership. But that decision must come from authentic relationship, not obligation. You looked across the polished table at your father. His face was pale, arrogance melted into something closer to defeat, perhaps even shame. His lips parted as though to argue, but no words came. For once in his life, the man who always had something cutting to say sat in silence, disarmed not by lawyers or contracts, but by truth. And in that silence, you realized. The story had shifted forever. That night, when you unlocked the front door, the hinges creaked as they always had, the sound strangely comforting, like an old friend welcoming you home. You stepped inside cautiously, as if the house might reject you again, but instead the air felt warmer. The scent of polished wood, faded books, and roses from the garden clung to the hallways, a reminder William's spirit lingered here. You walked slowly, fingertips brushing the walls that had held years of laughter and tears. Every photograph, every scratch carried memory. For the first time since William's passing, the house seemed alive again, not hollow, but steady, as if it recognized its rightful heir. You did not claim the master suite where your father had dreamed of ruling. Instead, you went to your childhood bedroom, the sanctuary that had held your secrets and moments of joy. The canopy bed creaked softly as you sat down, and the walls seemed to whisper bedtime stories and promises William once made. Here, surrounded by traces of innocence and resilience, you felt safe again. That night, you slept soundly, not as a guest, but as the rightful owner, knowing the house was irrevocably yours. The girl once cast out returned not as a victim, but as the heir carrying her grandfather's vision. As you drifted into sleep, one truth crystallized in your heart. This was no longer your father's story to write. This was yours. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of your childhood room, bathing the floor in gold. For the first time in weeks, you awoke without the weight of fear pressing on your chest. The quiet was not oppressive, it was peaceful. You walked through each hallway with slow reverence, letting your hands linger on photographs of generations, the carved banister worn smooth by decades of touch, the furniture marked with imprints of family life. You realized then William had left you more than wealth or walls, he had left you a foundation, a legacy built on dignity, integrity, and love. Stepping into the offices of Stewart Construction for the first time as its true owner, whispers trailed behind you. Eyes followed every movement, some curious, others filled with quiet hope. Many employees had known you since childhood, had seen you running through corridors on weekends while William worked. They had also seen Thomas's cold indifference, his arrogance that bled into every decision. Now, with them gone, their faces lit with possibility. You gathered them in the conference room, heart pounding, palms damp. The air buzzed with expectation. For a moment, your voice wavered, but you steadied yourself, remembering William's words. This company was built on integrity, close quote, you began, speaking not from notes but conviction. My grandfather believed that success without compassion is failure. That's the principle I will carry forward." The room fell silent, then heads nodded, eyes softened, and you felt strength flow into your words. They grew steadier, clearer, as belief began to replace doubt. It was not easy stepping into his role. Contracts piled high, board members demanded reassurance, and projects long neglected under Thomas required urgent attention. Some nights stretched into dawn as you sat alone in William's office, his presence lingering in the faint scent of old cologne clinging to the desk drawers. Papers scattered around you, the weight of leadership pressing down like an ocean. More than once, tears slipped silently as you whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." But each time despair clawed at you, you reached for the leather-bound journal William had given you. Its pages carried his voice, his lessons, his steady hand guiding you still. On one page, in his bold handwriting, he had written, "Lead with truth, and the rest will follow." With those words, the fog of doubt always lifted, replaced by resolve as strong as the foundation he had built. Your father did not disappear after losing everything. Instead, he lingered like a shadow, returning again and again, sometimes barging into the office uninvited, sometimes showing up at the house with flowers clutched awkwardly in his hand and a forced smile stretched too tight. "I've changed," he would insist, his voice carrying an urgency that almost sounded convincing. "I can help you. Let me be part of this again." Yet the desperation in his tone never aligned with his actions. His presence always dissolved into the same pattern, criticizing your decisions, second-guessing strategies, muttering you were too young, too naive, too stubborn. And when you refused to bend, choosing William's principles over his shortcuts, his mask cracked. He would lash out, call you ungrateful, claim you had turned him into the villain of his story. Each visit reminded you that some wounds cannot be mended with empty words. Still, you gave him chances, just as the letter instructed. You extended olive branches, small opportunities to prove sincerity, to contribute rather than consume. But he never lasted. His efforts collapsed under impatience and pride. Soon, the board of directors, men and women who had followed William's example for decades, came to the same conclusion you had drawn. Thomas had no place in the future William built. His reign was over. Meanwhile, under your leadership, the company thrived in ways no one predicted. Instead of slashing jobs or cutting corners to inflate profits, you invested in people. You created scholarships for employees' children, built affordable housing in struggling neighborhoods, and launched training programs for young workers who reminded you of William starting out with nothing but grit. Slowly the company's culture shifted. The air felt lighter. Employees spoke with pride, carrying themselves as though part of something meaningful, rather than just a machine for profit. The outside world noticed too. Local newspapers wrote about your leadership, calling you the unexpected heir who turned compassion into capital. National outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, Stewart Construction was no longer just a business empire, it was a model for how wealth and responsibility could coexist. And for the first time, you felt pride not only in what you inherited, but in what you were creating with your own hands. Nights in the house changed as well. Where once you had feared walking past your grandfather's empty chair in the study, you now found comfort there. You often lit the lamp on his desk, its glow casting familiar shadows. Sometimes you flipped through his notebooks, reading scribbles, half-finished ideas or single words underlined with purpose. In those quiet hours, you heard his voice in your mind, not as a ghost but as a guide. And on the hardest nights, when exhaustion threatened to pull you under, you replay the video he had left, the one reminding you that compassion was strength and that you were stronger than you knew. Each viewing renewed your resolve, steadying you like a hand on your shoulder. As for Thomas, he grew smaller with each passing month. His visits became rare, his anger faded, his eyes dulled by regret he never admitted. Neighbors whispered of him drinking alone in dim bars, slumped over a glass, mourning the power that slipped away. Once, in defiance, he tried to rally old partners against you, but the effort collapsed within weeks. People had seen who he truly was. And they had seen you standing firm, grounded in dignity, leading with integrity. In the end, loyalty drifted from him and settled on you, because loyalty always follows truth. 2 years passed. On the anniversary of William's death, you stood before employees and friends in the company's headquarters, now transformed into a place not just of work but of community. The room filled with flowers, photographs, and memories. One by one, people shared stories, his humor, his generosity, his uncompromising standards. Some laughed through tears, others spoke with trembling pride. You listened, heart swelling, as the portrait of the man who raised you emerged again through their voices. Finally, it was your turn. You stepped to the podium, voice steady. "My grandfather believed legacy isn't measured by what you take, but by what you give," you said. "Today, we honor that not only in memory, but in action." The words rang true, filling the room with hush before applause broke out like a wave. In that moment, with echoes of clapping hands surrounding you, you felt William's presence steady, proud, eternal. That night, as you walked through the house, you paused at the front door. Once it symbolized loss when you were forced to leave, when you feared never to return. Now, it symbolized justice and belonging. You touched the new lock and smiled. It was more than metal. It was proof that even when everything seemed stolen, dignity could be